I kept a black grease pencil mark on the inside of my left cuff for every soul aboard the tender skiff, and I scratched it through with the edge of my dive knife the moment I had a hand on them, wet or dry, breathing or not. It was a habit a chief named Aldous Greer drilled in every tender crew he ever ran, back when I was young enough to think it was just paperwork you carried on your skin instead of a clipboard. A way to keep a number in your head when your head wanted to do anything else but hold a number. 9 notches that morning, fresh and even, scratched in before we ever left the dock. 9. Going out onto the Calder shallows under a sky so clear it looked painted on, with not one cloud anywhere a man could point to and call trouble. The shallows weren't really shallow. The Solvane named it that because their instruments read the seabed as close enough to map cleanly, and the Solvane trust an instrument over a feeling every time, without exception, the way some men trust a coin flip. We were out there with 4 of them, collecting brine cores for survey neither side had bothered explaining to me in any detail I cared to remember. 6 humans working the winches and the coers, the Solvane riding their tether pod 20 meters off our stern, recording everything the way they always did, in that flat, patient hum their instruments make. The Solvane don't intervene in what they classify as non-critical environmental events. They watch, they log, and afterward they tell you very precisely what the probability of your survival had been. Down to a decimal, they seem to find more comforting than I ever have. They're not unkind, not in any way I could point to. They're simply certain that data outlives sentiment, and in 4 years of working alongside them, I had never once caught them being wrong about that. The squall came up the way squalls do on a world with no moon to drag the weather into any kind of rhythm a man could learn to read. Fast, sideways, and with no warning worth a name. 1 minute the water lay flat as glass, and the sun sat flat and white on top of it. And the next the whole shallow stood straight up in a gray wall and put the skiff over on her side like she weighed nothing at all. I went into the water with the others. I remember the cold less than I remember the light. That storm came in under full daylight, no dimming, no dust to soften it, and even with the swells throwing us under and dragging us back up, the water stayed bright the whole time. Sunlit green, near the surface going to black a few meters down, like drowning inside a lit window. I got the line off the davit clip before I went under the second time, and I got a fist around the first body I found, and it was Reyes, and I marked him off with the knife before I'd even hauled him to the line, because some habits don't wait for confirmation. That was a mistake. I learned it fast. A notch crossed off too early is a lie you tell yourself in your own handwriting, and the water does not forgive lies, even small administrative ones. I found Park next, half tangled in her own harness, and by the time I'd freed her, the line itself had gone slack at the far cleat, and I had to swim it backhand over hand before it was worth anything to anybody. Somewhere in there, I lost the clean order of things. I know I went under twice more. I know the Solvane pod kept its distance the entire time, holding exactly 20 meters off, the way it was built and instructed to, for clinical faces behind a fog canopy watching 6 humans try not to die and see their own instruments had rated that very morning as nothing worth a second look. I found Core clinging to the overturned hull with both hands gone white at the knuckle, and I found Anand a half body length from going under for good, his mouth already under twice before I reached him. Both times I cut a notch, and both times I checked the cut before I let myself move on, because somewhere between the second body and the third, I had decided I would rather drown checking my own arithmetic than live having guessed at it. I did not find Voss. Voss found me. He came up under my arm with Anand already slung across his shoulders because Anand had gone down a second time and Voss had gone in after him without a line of his own, which is the kind of thing a man does at 19 and never again after, if he's fortunate enough to earn never again. I took Anand off him, notched the cuff, and told Voss to grab the line, right there an arm's length from his open hand. He grabbed it. I saw him grab it, saw his fingers close white around the braid. I crossed him off the count and turned because I had 8 crossed by then and one more body somewhere in that bright water, and the cold had gotten into my counting the way it gets into your hands first, before it ever reaches anything that matters more. The squall went through the way they always do out there, fast in, fast out, leaving the shallows lying flat and glassy again within minutes, as if none of it had happened, sun still high, still white, still indifferent to all of it. There's something almost insulting about a sky that clears that fast. You want the weather to look ashamed of itself afterward, and it never does. We hauled ourselves up onto the righted hull one body at a time, and I called the cuff out loud while the Solvane pod finally closed the distance it had held all morning, for faces still working their own math behind the glass. 8 crossed. I had 8 crossed and 8 wet, shaking bodies stretched along that hull, and I counted them again with my eyes the way I'd already counted them with a knife, and the 9th one wasn't there. Voss had grabbed the line. I had watched him grab it with my own eyes. What I hadn't watched, because I was already turning toward the 9th body, was Kor's safety strap fouling on the cleat behind him, and Voss letting go of his own line with one hand to clear it for a man who already had both his own hands free, and the swell that took him under in the half-second his other hand wasn't quite enough to hold against it. I never finished his notch. There's a mark on that cuff still. I kept it against every regulation written about personal items in a survivor's debrief file. That's a 1.25 lines, the knife skidding off true before the cross could close clean, because by then my hand was shaking and I didn't care to steady it. The senior Solvane came aboard once we'd stabilized, and it looked at the cuff before it looked at any of us, because that is exactly what a Solvane will do. It asked me, not unkindly. They're genuinely never unkind about it. Why I kept counting it all once the squall reached the severity their own instruments had logged. Their models, it told me, had set our survival probability at 61% the instant that wall of water stood up. A number that low, it said, in its careful, flat way, generally returns the same final count of survivors whether or not anyone bothers keeping one by hand. I told it I hadn't been counting for the percentage. I told it I was counting because somebody had to know, second by second, who was still owed a hand and who wasn't, and a number you're carrying low in your chest feels nothing like a number you're only remembering afterward. It's the difference between a debt and a memory. I wanted a debt the whole time I was in that water. I wanted to know every single second the shallows had us, exactly how much I still owed, so I would know, without anyone's instrument to tell me, the precise moment I was finally done. The Solvane looked at that cuff for a long while after I said it. It didn't have anything clinical left to offer, which for a Solvane is its own kind of answer. The closest thing to silence their species allows itself. I still wear that cuff. 8 clean crossings and a quarter line that never finished. And some mornings I run my thumb over that last unfinished mark before I do anything else at all, the way another man might touch a ring he still wears or a tag he never took off. It isn't a wound. It's a ledger. And in all the years since, I have never once let it close. I have trained other tender crews since, the way Greer trained me, and I teach them the same habit, the grease pencil and the knife and the cross that only counts once you've checked it twice. Most of them think it's superstition the first season. I'll let them think that. It stops being superstition the first time the water comes up under full daylight and doesn't ask anybody's permission first. And by then they understand it the way I do. Not as a number for anyone else's report, but as a debt you carry low in your own chest until you've paid every line of it down to 0, or until you can't, and you are the unfinished mark anyway, because somebody has to remember exactly where it stopped.